I'm Bob Vines, Prevention Specialist with the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. Today, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the messages we receive from a very young age about masculinity, and also how important modeling healthy masculinity is for us as coaches, fathers, mentors of young boys and young men. Whenever we have these conversations, I feel it's important to point out that it's not an attack on masculinity. On the contrary, I believe that we need to celebrate who we are regardless of where we land on the gender or sexuality spectrum. For instance, I don't like to use the term toxic masculinity. What makes us men is not toxic or poison. Beer, barbecue, football, flannel, well-worn trucker hat. These are all wonderful things, at least in my book they are. We can acknowledge that and still be strong allies to women and girls, children, and the marginalized. From a very young age, we are inundated with messages of what makes a real man. Some of these messages are blatant, like some of the advertising we see here, music videos, even action movies. Other messages are a little more difficult to see, delivered by fathers, coaches, mentors, friends as fathers, the male role models we have in our lives. A lot of these messages are unintentional, slightly negligible, delivered in an attempt to model the type of man we need to grow up to be so that we can fit nicely into this world. We might have heard things like man up or boys don't cry, language meant to toughen us up. You may have even heard messages that call your masculinity into question or even your sexuality. I had a football coach tell me once that if I couldn't take a hit, they had a spot open on the cheerleader squad for me. And that coach said far nastier things to me and other players, but I remember the times he called out my manhood the most. So we take these messages, all these messages from the media and from the men in our lives, we take them into adulthood, and then we have boys of our own. Last fall, I was leaving a football game at the local high school. There were a bunch of elementary school kids throwing a football around in the grass behind the stadium. One kid was asking for the ball to be thrown to him, but the kid with the ball just simply refused. Instead, he told the other kids in their group that he wasn't going to throw the ball to him because he wouldn't catch it anyway because he was gay. That statement of hypermasculinity not only sent a crushing message to the kid who just wanted a pass, but it also sent a message to the other kids in that group. That message saying that this is the standard, this is the pecking order, and if you want to be accepted, you need to act a certain way. And this child was so young, you might ask yourself, as I did, where on earth did he learn that? So, what does it take to be a real man? Well, talent on the ball field. From the time we are in grade school, the boys who show talent on the playground are rewarded with higher social capital, which they will carry throughout their school years. We learn early on that if you are good at sports, you are treated differently. That is our first measuring stick. Not soon after that, we are judged on how successful we are with the ladies. And those that aren't so lucky, or those that don't fall into our definition of what boys should be, immediately get placed to the side, saddled with homophobic tags. We start hearing it in middle school and high school, bragging about sexual conquests and harassing others for their lack of sexual conquests. This is our second measuring stick. Finally, our worth is measured by our success in the boardroom, by the cars we drive, the toys we buy, the thickness of our wallet. The ball field, bedroom, boardroom. Nearly all of the messages we receive on masculinity involve these three areas. These are the measuring sticks we have chosen to define masculinity. And each time we hear these messages, the definition of what makes a real man narrows. This is called the Collective Socialization of Masculinity, or like the folks at A Call to Men simplify, the man box. The man box identifies the limitations on what a man is supposed to be and what he believes. These expectations are taught to men, sometimes unconsciously, and reinforced by society. Real men are powerful and strong. They are in control. They're the providers and the protectors. They are fearless and emotionless. They are successful, the breadwinners. All of these expectations are put into the man box and sealed up tight. The older we get, the tighter that seal gets. As a result of the collective socialization of masculinity, we are taught to objectify women, see them as property and of less value than men. So how do we change that? Well, it isn't easy. I mean, it took us a very long time to get to this point. Most men are not abusers. Most men understand that gender-based violence is not a women's issue, it's a human issue. And most men would do something about it if they knew what to do. Look, I'm not asking men or the men in your life to turn off thousands of years of collective socialization of masculinity. But I am suggesting that there are small things that each of us can do that will begin to change culture and better equip ourselves to be stronger allies to women and the marginalized. Today is our first step. It's our first baby step. Today, I want to discuss how we can model healthy masculinity to the boys in our lives. Consider that football coach I mentioned earlier in his comments about girls. All of the creative and colorful ways he used to berate his players, the most effective way was to call into question the player's masculinity. Now, this man was a beloved coach. We all looked up to him and took his word as gospel. But think of the term, "you play like a girl." What message are we sending to our boys about girls? We're telling them that girls are of lesser value. I know that many of us have said similar things to our own children, whether it was in the course of sports or maybe dealing with a bullying issue, or even during the course of punishment. We tell our boys to man up, stop being like a girl, don't cry. You have to stand up for yourself. In order to inspire them to perform better in sports, we often tell our children to get mad. Think about that term. We tell young boys that they shouldn't be emotional, but at the same time, we tell them, encourage them actually, to get mad. Because anger is the only emotion that is allowed in the man box. If this is the only way boys can express emotion, you can imagine how dangerous that becomes when they reach adulthood and begin to form other relationships. I train coaches across Wyoming in a program called Coaching Boys into Men. We utilize coaches and their mentorship roles to have quick, easy discussions with their student athletes about healthy relationships and building skills to be more comfortable in taking leadership roles and bystander interventions. We use coaches because young men view them in high regard as male mentors beyond the field of play. And we use student athletes because of that considerable social capital they hold with their peer group. In each of the schools that have fully implemented this program in Wyoming, we have seen considerable increases in the student athletes' ability to recognize harmful relationship behaviors and a far greater likelihood that they would step in if they witness harmful relationship behaviors. These same results ring true with a recent study of middle school teams with an adapted program and a companion program for girls' teams called Athletes as Leaders. To date, we have trained 160 coaches, administrators, and advocates on coaching boys into men and athletes as leaders in Wyoming. 11 high schools and 50 sports teams have implemented these programs. Now, during these workshops, I will typically pick out the coach with the most experience and ask them, do you remember every kid you have ever coached? At best, they say that they could probably recognize a majority, but most of the time, no. It's virtually impossible to remember every football player from a 30-year coaching career. I will then say to them, every single one of your former players remembers you. You may never know what these kids' lives are like away from school or practice, and how important it is to provide them with a strong example of healthy masculinity. So you might be saying, well, I'm not a coach, so this doesn't relate to me. Whether you're a coach, teacher, parent, grandparent, uncle, consider the role you play in the lives of your children's friends and the long-lasting impact you'll have on their lives. Children learn by watching the adults in their lives. Be cognizant of how you portray healthy relationships, Be aware that the boys are watching how you treat women and girls in your life, your spouse, their siblings, the server at Applebee's. One of the things that we discuss with coaches is taking advantage of coachable moments or teachable moments. When they hear disrespectful language coming from their players or witness disrespectful behaviors, say on the bus or even in the hallways, we encourage them to appropriately address those moments. Of course, experiencing teachable moments doesn't only happen within the world of youth athletics. Teachable moments can happen anywhere at any time. Consider those kids that were throwing the ball around behind the bleachers that one night at the football game. Whenever we take advantage of these teachable moments, we send a message that these words and actions are not acceptable and are damaging. If our boys begin to hear those messages as much as the messages they receive about masculinity through the media and centuries of collective socialization, then we begin to see true culture change. You see, by modeling allyship, you are opening the door for these young people to do the same. They are more likely to not only change their own behavior, but to step in when they see harmful behaviors. One of my oldest friends is a high school soccer coach. Because of our friendship, he was the first coach I tried to sell on the idea of coaching boys and men. He was apprehensive at first. His first reaction was, "I'm not an expert on this. I don't know how to have these conversations with my boys." My friend couldn't have been more wrong. I knew this because our sons grew up together. He coached my son from the time he was 10 years old. Growing up, my son was at his house nearly as much as my own, as well as most of his friends. And when they weren't there, they were at my house or the houses of other friends. We knew we all played a role in the lives of these young men. We essentially practiced zone parenting. Even though our boys have all grown up and started their own lives, Coach's house is still a safe gathering place for his current players. So when he told me that he didn't know how to have these conversations with his players, I reminded him he already is having those conversations and has been having them for years. Before I wrap this up, I need to point out that I didn't make all this stuff up. There are incredible organizations out there that provide resources and information. They have done much work on the collective socialization of masculinity and providing healthy masculine education out there. A list of these resources are at the end of this video, so please check them out. Finally, modeling healthy masculinity to young people isn't the only way men can become stronger allies in ending gender-based violence. There are several other ways that you can help, such as having meaningful conversation with other men, intervention techniques, making privilege work in positive ways, and speaking up against sexist behaviors and others. Hopefully we'll be able to address these in other installments. Until then, take good care.